Chapter 4. As soon as the man saw Frank and Joe, he turned to hurry off. In doing so, he hit the door frame and dropped his briefcase, which burst open. At a distance, the boys could not read out any of the printing on the letters that fell out, but one had red and blue stripes on the top. The tall blond man snatched up the papers and stuffed them back into the briefcase. He quickly zippered it shut and began to run. "Don't seem like he's on the level," Joe remarked, "or he wouldn't be racing off like that. We can't let him get away." The stranger's long legs and agility helped him cover a wide stretch in a short time. Before the Hardys could catch up to him, he reached the exit and jumped into a waiting car, which zoomed off. Frank and Joe stopped short, puzzled. Was the man afraid of them? If so, why? "Maybe that briefcase had something to do with him running off," Frank said. The boys went inside the terminal building. They continued to look at the planes while keeping their eyes open for any other suspicious characters. They saw none, and then finally returned home. "You must be hungry," said Miss Hardy. "I'll have a hot pie, but it's getting a little cold now." Joe patted her shoulder. "Well, shall we eat dessert first?" he teased. Later, the boys went upstairs to change for Chet's barn dance. Both put on jeans and plaid shirts and big straw hats. They packed overnight bags and then joined their mother, who was waiting to be driven to their friend's house. Just before leaving the house, Frank heard a signal from their private shortwave set. "Dad must be calling," he said, and then raced to Mr. Hardy's second-floor study. "F.H. home?" he said over the mic. "Over." "Frank," said his father. "How's everything?" "Okay, Dad. How about you?" "Fair," the detective said. "But I have a new lead to follow. You won't be able to get in touch with me for a couple of days. Did you get my message from the ham operator?" "Yes, Dad." Frank told him all that had happened in the last 24 hours, and then including the wiretapping. Mr. Hardy whistled. "Well, then the gang knew where you were going." "Shall Joe and I tell Chief Kolig we were the first burglars?" Frank asked. "I guess you better, but warn him the information is confidential, and don't tell him what the invention is that you were after." He now explained that he had been tipped off by Chicago police that a gang suspected of robbery there had suddenly vanished. A squealer had reported that they were out to get the Hardy detectives. The boy's father did not know why, but surmised it might concern Mr. Wright's invention. "And now let me talk to your mother," Mr. Hardy said. Half an hour later, Frank and Joe stopped at Chief Kolig's home and made their report. The chief burst out laughing. "So you're the ones who knocked out those men. I guess they had a real scare. They haven't talked since." By the time the boys reached the Morton's farm with Callie Shaw, the dance was underway. A Bayport high school combo was playing. "Hey, masterminds!" Chet shouted as the Hardy strolled in. "I thought you'd never get here. Boy, goodness, wait till I tell you about my flight." He began to describe the adventure, supplementing his words with swooping motions of both hands. His sister Isla joined Callie and the boys. She was a slim, dark-haired girl and very pretty. "Hi, Joe, Frank, Callie." And then, hearing her brother, she said laughingly, "Oh no, is Chet talking about his flight again? He hasn't stopped since he landed." "You just don't know nothing about real flying," her brother put out, "until you've been in one of them old biplanes." "Well, it's our turn next," Joe reminded him. The following hours passed quickly. When it was time for supper, Joe and Ida decided to eat outside. They filled their paper plates with sandwiches and chocolate cake and cups of lemonade and went to sit on the steps of the Mortons' front veranda. And as they ate, I did glance down the driveway into which many of the guests had parked their car. The Hardys' convertible was near the end of the long queue. Suddenly, Isla touched Joe's arm. "What's the matter?" he asked. "I saw someone lurking behind your car. Yeah, there he is." Joe peered into the darkness. He saw a man, his hat pulled low, pop up from behind the car, then duck down again. At once, the young detective sprang to his feet and ran towards the mysterious figure. The fellow might be after the secret radio. "Who are you?" he shouted, seeing the trunk lid rise and the light go on. "And what are you doing?" The intruder ran from behind the car, disappeared into the darkness. Joe dashed after him. "Keep your distance or you'll be getting hurt," the man shouted, but Joe went on. Isla screamed for help, and Frank, Chet, their classmates, Biff Hopper, and Jerry Gilroy raced from the barn. "What's wrong?" Frank asked. "We saw a man lurking behind your car," Isla answered in a trembling voice. "Joe ran after him through the woods, but was warned away." At once Frank and his companions rushed in that direction. The boys hadn't gone far when they heard a muffled cry for help, followed by the roar of a car speeding off. Coming to a halt, Frank signaled to his friends for silence. The sounds of the car faded away. Everything's still except the big grandfather clock in the hall of the Mortons' home. It began to strike. It was midnight. Frank thought of what had happened just 24 hours earlier. "Joe! Where are you, Joe?" His call went unanswered. The young detective stood frozen in his feet. Had his brother become the victim of the gang? By this time, everyone at the party had raced outside to learn what had happened. They joined in a frantic search, but without success. "I'm afraid he's been kidnapped," Frank said grimly. "In that car we heard roaring off?" Biff Hopper asked. "Yep." Jerry Gilroy chimed in. "But by who, and what reason?" "I don't know," Frank said. He turned and rushed back to the convertible, and seeing the trunk open, he immediately looked in the tire well. The secret radio was still there. "Joe must have blocked an attempt theft and was taken away so he couldn't identify the man," Frank thought. He slammed the trunk shut, asked his friends to guard the car, and ran to the house. He scooped up the telephone and dialed the home number of Chief Kolig. "What?" the officer exclaimed when Frank told him about Joe's probable kidnapping. "I'll call the FBI and also get some of my own men out there right away, and I'll be coming myself." He and 3 officers arrived shortly and were given a briefing. The place was carefully examined, but searchlights picked up little. There was such a profusion of tire tracks on the main road that those of the main car could not be identified. Isla, the only one except Joe had seen the suspect, could give little details other than he was tall, heavy-set, and wore gloves. "Well, then we can't find any fingerprints on your car," the chief said. Frank nodded. "He could be the man who ran from Joe and me at the airport." Frank told the policeman about him and gave a further description. "We'll be on the lookout for him, as well as for Joe. Well, there's nothing more we can do here, but I'll leave 2 of my men." Solemnly, the group left the barn dance, and each guest expressed a hope for Joe's speedy return. The Mortons tried to comfort Frank and discuss whether or not they should tell Miss Hardy and call her and tell her the news. "I don't see that anything could be gained by that," Chet's mother said. "Let's wait." She insisted Frank try to get some sleep, but he lay wide awake, hoping the phone would ring with good news from Kolig, but nothing came. Chet, in the same room, was also restless. Finally, at 5 o'clock, he said, "What are we doing here?" "I'm not sure," Frank sighed. We've absolutely no clue. In fact, we don't even have a description of the car that we heard drive off last night." "Well, Joe could be miles from here by now," his chum remarked. Frank thought for a minute. "Let's drive down the road and make some inquiries at the farmhouses along the way," Maybe there's a slim chance someone spotted the kidnapped car. The boys left the house quietly, jumped into Hardy's convertible, and they waved to the patrolling police guards. Frank drove along the narrow, tree-lined road, and as they feared, all their inquiries were fruitless. Most of the farmers they questioned had retired long before midnight and had neither seen nor heard nothing. "Well, guess we might as well go home," Chet suggested. But Frank wasn't ready to give up. "Let's drive on just a little further," he said. About 6:30, the boys spotted a farmer cutting weeds by the roadside and stopped to question him. He rubbed his chin dubiously while listening to their story. "Well, quite a few cars went by my place every night," he said. "Well, now you come to mention it, there was an automobile come whizzing along and stopped here right after midnight. It woke me up with the two men shouting it at each other." "Did you happen to see the car?" Frank asked. "No, I didn't get up. Of course, my home is right beside the road, and I couldn't help but hear what the men were saying. The car come along on a mighty lively clip, but when it got in front of the house, the driver slammed on the brakes and stopped. And then there seemed to have been an argument, and I heard him telling somebody they must have gone past the crossroads in the dark. The other man started jawing at him, and they had themselves quite a row. Finally, they turned the car around and went back." "To the crossroads?" asked Chet. "Yeah, that's about 2 miles back. I remember. One road it goes to Grantham, and the other heads through the truck parks farm." Frank and Chet returned to the crossroads. But which way should they go? Right to the farms, or left to the Grishamham? The kidnappers might have hid Joe in one of the truck farms, Chet suggested. "Yeah, except that all those farms are pretty close together, and everyone knows everyone else's business," said Frank. "I'd rather tackle the road to Gresham. If we can't find Joe, we can come back and try the other road." He took the turn to the left. As they sped along, the boys spotted the wreckage of a black car in a roadside ditch. Afraid that this was the kidnapped car, Frank pulled up. "Some accident," Chet observed. The license plate had been removed from the badly smashed-up car. "Well, if anyone got hurt," Frank said, "they'll know in Grissom. We'll ask the police there." Suddenly, a black sedan swung out of the lane some distance ahead and roared off towards town. Frank stared fixedly at the rear seat. "Look!" he exclaimed, gripping Chet's arm. "Did you see what I saw?" "What?" "A hand. Isn't that someone signaling?" Chet gazed ahead and saw a hand frantically for a moment in the rear window and then suddenly withdrawn. "You're right!" Chet snapped. "Joe!" Frank started the convertible, sped off in pursuit. The other car had a good lead and was increasing speed. It was almost obscured by a cloud of dust, but Frank memorized the out-of-state license plate. "We're gaining on them," Chet declared. Frank nodded. Inch by inch, the intervening distance lessened. Trees and farms and hedges flashed by. At times, the boys could hardly see the sedan through the swirling clouds of dust. Suddenly, the steady hum of the convertible's engine changed to its rhythm. The engine sputtered. Chet groaned. "What now?" he muttered as the car slowed down. The boys' hearts sank when the engine quit completely. They looked dismally at the other car as it disappeared around a distant bend in the road. End of chapter 4.